separately.
If you want a Zoom recording, you'll need to record it on Zoom. YouTube will keep a recording on YouTube.
We'll do that. Thank you.
Enter your passcode. Enter iPhone passcode for authenticator. So I have to do that first and then do the authenticator.
All this security.
Enter number 45. Is it still 45 or is it too late?
I think that's right. Try it.
I don't know. I'm gonna lose it. I think I don't need to do another one. Having trouble. Enter a second security code for your Microsoft account. Send another request.
Hi, Breeze. Good afternoon. Hi, Brandy. Hi, Gia.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for making it on a sunny Friday afternoon. Hi, Curry. Hi, Kelly. Hey, everybody. Gabby, hello. We'll get officially going here in just a couple minutes. Hopefully people had a lunch. And for League of Oregon Cities, I want to make sure I'm saying your name right. Ariel introduced your intern, and your name is spelled GIA, but that could be two ways. Can you come off mute and let me know?
Yeah, it's just pronounced Gia.
Just like I would think.
Yep.
So thank you. Thank you. Gia, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thanks
it.
for making it today for Ariel. Hi, Nick. Sorry for the page shuffle. If anyone else noticed, they get extra credit.
That's right.
Yeah, we had a shuffle in the packet. Hi, Jennifer. Hi, John. Page 9 and 11 were swapped. I'm super sorry, everyone. That is my fault. Hi, Kimberly. Audie, thank you for making it. Hi, Inga. Hey.
Can I speak to Elliot if he's back?
He's there. Yeah, he's there. We're live and streaming as well.
Elliot?
Like, can you hear Amanda? Okay.
Yep.
So
I'm just going off mute so you don't get any weird background noise.
I didn't hear what you said.
I'm reading myself in here so you don't get any weird background noise.
Okay. So I saved the packet with the pages switched and I highlighted the pages that were different. So it'd be easier for you to see that when you do when you reorganize the pages, you'll see the ones that are relevant, I think. If you go back, if you're going to go into the packet and repost it.
So there's not a new file?
Yes, it's a new file, and I highlighted the page numbers at the bottom right corner of the pages. So when you look at it in the organization view, it should be easier to see.
That's pages 9 and 11. Thanks, you guys. So I'm going to just call us together. This is Kirsten Green's voice on a sunny Friday afternoon. Sunny in the Valley. Thank you so much for making time for this important work. I'm going to turn it over. We are live streaming. We hope we're live streaming on YouTube and recording accordingly. So this will be available for folks after if people aren't able to catch the meeting today. And I would love to turn it over to Commissioner Thompson for an official opening.
Good afternoon, everyone. To echo Kirsten's comments, we're delighted that you're here with us today. When she asked me what I'd like to say to welcome you, I said, we're going to do the hokey pokey where you put your whole brains in. We're going to have the left brain where we deal with data. We're going to have the right brain where we deal with the timeless and the sacred. And our task today is to work on integrating and harmonizing those. Awesome. I hope that makes sense. Thank you. Thank you. Take it away.
Thanks, Commissioner, and welcome everybody. I see just a number of folks have joined. Thank you so much. There's 25 of us in our Zoom room here for the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, the Goal 5 Cultural Areas process. We literally cannot do this without you. convened here. So thank you. I'm the Deputy Director and the Tribal Liaison for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. In this role, I serve as facilitator of this group with Commissioner Thompson's permission. And then also Amanda Punton is here in the room with me. I'll try and turn blur off as soon as possible so you can see Amanda too. But we're in the Portland State Office building, and we've got a few staff down in Salem. But folks are for the most part remote. We did a robust round of introductions at our last meeting and would invite folks to send us any corrections on the meeting summary within 2 weeks. I think today, in the interest of time, if it's okay with everybody, we'll welcome members who were not able to be present with us at our first meeting. And that would be Curry Gill with the Heritage Program at Oregon Parks and Recreation, and also Keenan. Curry, could I have you introduce yourself first, and then Keenan will turn it to you?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity. And hi, everybody. Thanks for your work at the first session. I'm Curry Gill. I'm the Outreach and Grants Coordinator for Oregon Heritage, which is part of Parks and Recreation Department. It also includes the State Historic Preservation Office. And I'm also the coordinator of the Certified Local Government Program, which is a federal historic preservation program for local governments.
Great, thank you. Keenan, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Keenan Norton-McCallion. I'm an attorney with Schwalbe, Williamson & Wyatt, land use attorney, represent primarily developers and companies. I apologize for my absence for the first meeting, but I'm looking forward to getting this going. Thank you.
Thank you. Just muting here. All right, Keenan, thank you. All right, folks. Well, we have a full meeting plan, and is it gorgeous everywhere? Councilor Anderson, how is it where you are? I know you had some weather earlier in the week.
Beautiful, actually, outside, but when you step outside, it's a little outside, but it's going to shape up to be, I think, a beautiful weekend. Thank you.
Good. Well, welcome and thank you. I just get so Valley centric here. I assume that everyone's having gorgeous weather right now. So if we end a little early, I suspect that no one will get too mad at me on a Friday. But we have a lot to learn together today. We I always have a lot to learn from Amanda, and she's going to be turned over to here very shortly. I mentioned this in our packet. We held back on a full rule draft. We're still working at that internally at DLCD. We are working in close partnership with Oregon Parks and Recreation Department and also their Heritage Program to make sure we advance a set of rules that supports where they are right now and also supports the charge. So we're linked arms with John and Curry and the team at SHPO and at the Heritage Program. And we hope to bring you a full draft rules at our next meeting. In advance of the next meeting, we'll try and get that out 2 weeks in advance, but we are shifting our thinking a little bit. Oregon Parks and Recreation Department, and John, you might want to speak to this, but they have a proposal and have had a proposal for a heritage hub system that our directors and both our director, we're united in support for that. And we want to make sure that that gets in place and built out before we bring on additional workload to SHPO and to Heritage Program that probably isn't quite timely. So, John, did I get that right on Heritage Hub? Is there anything you or Curry would like to say about that?
Yeah. I'll just give one comparison. So the state of Washington has something similar. They have it's just a portal where people find out where they need to get in whatever process they're following. And I years ago, before I came to Oregon SHPO, I was a beta tester for that system. And when it was put in place, I asked their state archaeologist, his name is Rob Whitlam, how much time that saved staff. And his response was that they went from reviewing submissions on day 30 to reviewing them in 2 to 3 days. And so we have capacity issues now. And so we're hoping a system like that will allow us to, more fully do all the things that we're supposed to be doing.
Awesome. And I know everyone wants that, John, so we're completely with you. Could I just check from a technical perspective, Casaria or Elliot, do I need to, I'm fighting the urge to hit record on my Zoom, but are we already recording via the live stream, or just want to make sure?
Sorry, would know best, but my understanding is yes, this is will be held posterity on the YouTube.
That's correct. YouTube will hold a recording.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Thank you, YouTube. And then we'll do a meeting summary, and that will be our record. But for now, we're capturing everything on YouTube. So, okay. So just a reminder, thank you for that, John. And so are there any questions about the agenda today? So really mostly we're hearing about kind of a baseline information on the standard Gold 5 process in relationship to kind of some other related resources. So Amanda has a good short presentation here, and we'll have time for discussion. And then we're really pleased to have 5 local government examples. 4 local government presenters are with us today, members of our RAC, who are going to give us an overview. So thank you all. And that is going to be the bulk of the meeting, is hearing about existing local programs. Jill, Nick, others, thank you so much. Kelly, and so we will hear from you shortly, and then we will be sending out a survey. So Elliot has developed just a Survey Monkey to go out after the meeting, because we know with 25 of us, we're not going to be able to hear necessarily from everybody, and some of you might be thinkers and not talkers. I happen to be a talker more than a thinker, unfortunately, but some of us don't all speak in meetings, and so that's a way as well or speak as much, or can't get a word in edgewise. So that's a way to please give us some additional feedback on the discussion questions that are on your agenda. That'll be coming out, and Elliot, I don't think we set a deadline for that, but if we could ask people to fill that out by the end of March, that would be great. By maybe that end of day, that Sunday, that last day in March, or April 1st, either way. So any questions about the agenda, kind of where we are? Seeing no hands. Okay, why don't we, if you're ready, she's getting ready.
Yeah, I just have to get something to Elliot, and I think I'm just about there.
Yeah, we had you guys in your packets. You would have had to do a very careful read to notice this, because I missed it. Is pages, actually I had a previous version that I swapped page numbers in the packet, you guys. So the first, Amanda had it all perfectly with all 5 local government examples. And then I switched it in order to have City of Salem and Coos Bay go first. And in switching of that order, I apologize that we switched pages 9 and 11 in the packet. So Nick pointed out that page 9 should have been page 11, and page 11 should have been page 9. So as we get to, if you printed your copy, just flag that for yourself. Amanda right now is just making sure that Elliot has a version he can put up on the website, and then we'll put that version in the chat. So if you want to sort of be clicking through a corrected version, we'll get that up and in front of folks. But if you caught that, you do get extra points. How are we on that?
Well, can I just tell Elliot?
Yes.
All right, so Elliot, it's in the RAC meeting to packet. And it's the file that was saved at 12:56.
And I think we will just pop it on a recording on Zoom now too, because Sarah, that would be great. Then I won't get nervous. I'm still building my trust relationship with YouTube, and I'm just not there. So if we could just hit record on this Zoom, I'd be grateful. That hasn't failed us since we started using it in COVID. Thank you, Casaria. Thank you, Elliot. Okay, so then you'll want to pull up your PowerPoint. So she'll need to shift gears. Thanks, Amanda. Sorry for the scramble there.
Can we do this? And all right, so share screen.
we can see it. You just want to run it from like beginning or something.
I think the setup isn't going to allow me to
Perfect.
look at my notes, but
Here, why don't I share? Stop share. I'll share.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's in the folder.
The one I recently saved was
In the folder.
Hello, everyone. Amanda here. Sorry about being a little, I don't know, going a couple different directions. So I'm about to talk about our Goal 5 rule. And so when we had the work group meeting with tribal representatives, I went over a lot of this information.
Kirsten, your computer went on mute.
Sorry. You have to restart that. Yeah. Sorry. Say hello, my Amanda. I'm Amanda.
Okay. Unless you want to go on mute, no, I'll unmute mine.
Okay. Go ahead. Are you hearing Amanda?
Can you guys hear me now?
Okay, now go.
Okay, how's this?
That's fine.
Okay, so hello, where did I start? I'm Amanda. I'm going to talk about Goal 5, the Goal 5 rule, Division 23, and how the pieces of it that will be helpful for thinking about the rule writing we're about to begin, or what we're working on. And Kirsten's going to pull up the, she's going to share her screen so I can look at my notes on my,
I think this is why you just look on my shoulder. So
today. So, yeah. Get in. We're almost there. Yeah. And that's good. Yeah, we can start from that slide. So the Goal 5 rule, as we've talked about before, or the Goal 5 talks to several different resource categories. Cultural areas are in the list of categories that the goal says shall be inventoried. And I'm going to point out here, this will come up later, that historic resources is in this category of resources where inventories are encouraged. So next slide. So there's the beginning of the division, the rule 0020 talks about this interplay between what we call the standard Goal 5 process and the individual rules for the discrete Goal 5 resource categories. And the take-home message here is that you can kind of balance it in all kinds of ways. So there you have the standard process that either gets applied directly by a local government, or you apply an individual rule that may have elements of the standard process, or some of those elements may have been replaced by deliberation that happened at the state level that results in either pointing to a established inventory or pointing to a state established set of protection measures. The second bullet here talks about safe harbors, and safe harbors are within a rule an optional pathway for very clearly complying with the rule. Might set like maybe it is a particular inventory that's used, or a particular way of developing a local inventory rather than a more open-ended way of developing an inventory, or it could be specific standards that get applied without having to go through an assessment process to look at how those specific standards would affect development and other people and in people's enjoyment of private property. And I just want to bring this up here because it's something that could be incorporated into the rule that we're writing, but it wouldn't have a safe. We might not end up with safe harbors in this rule. And next slide. So the standard Goal 5 process, the way this rule works, first I'm going to talk about it as a local government would apply it if that was what they were doing in order to reach protection measures for a particular Goal 5 category. So the rule there's 3 rules within the division that describe a kind of detailed instructions for the steps that would end up with a local protection program to protect significant Goal 5 resources in their jurisdiction. The Goal 5 rules, the Goal 5 and implementing regulations kind of recognize this, I'll call it a tug of war between protection of Goal 5 resources and in urban areas, the amount of land that's available to develop in areas that are designated for urban development. And in rural areas, Goal 5 protections would affect options for specific developments that would be allowed in rural zones. So the Goal 5 process includes an inventory and an assessment of the resource sites. And then from that assessment, significant resources, a subset of significant resource sites are pulled out from the larger category of the resource. And then there's something called, then you look at all the allowed and conditionally allowed uses that are in the zone in which a Goal 5 resource exists or a set of Goal 5 resources exists. And kind of list out what those conflicting uses are. And then you go through an assessment to look at how different approaches to protecting the resource site would impact the ability to develop those allowed or conditionally allowed uses. And then in that assessment, you kind of look at the pros and cons and then pick an acceptable pathway or acceptable set of protection measures, and that gets adopted into a local program. Now, like I said earlier, that some of these or all of these steps can happen at the rule writing level. So that's when kind of through a deliberation with the state and other people who are involved in the rule writing, we still are we're considering all these different steps in the Goal 5 process, but we're addressing them so that when we write the rule, we've already settled on solutions, I'll say, to these different steps. And then we're going to go to the next slide. And something else to be considerate of when we're talking about Goal 5 and kind of planning in general anymore is that, well, let's stick with Goal 5, that the Goal 5 rule in the standard process, it says that when a local government has decided to protect a resource site, implementing measures applied to conflicting uses on the resource site and within its impact area shall contain clear and objective standards. Now, this rule seems to be silent on the use of subjective language in a resource-specific rule. So a rule where some of these decisions about the balancing have happened at the state level during the rule writing process. But it's still always a good idea to have clear and objective compliance pathway, because that reduces the potential for controversy when a local government ends up applying these standards to application for development. And I'm just going to flag something here for future discussion, which is that when we're talking about housing, we also have a statute in our housing laws that says that only clear and objective standards can be applied to applications for housing development. But there's an exception for an application or permit for residential development in historic areas designated for protection under a land use planning goal protecting historic areas. So I want to mention that here because we're going to have some overlap between our interest in cultural areas and our existing rule for historic areas, and this question about whether the use of clear and objective standards we'll just have to be thinking about as we later in discussions about the rule writing.
And pardon me, we do have a question from, I think you said it's okay to call you Nicholas, from Nick or Nicholas Starton, please, sir.
Yeah, just a clarification on the clear and objective piece. It seems like the step in.
Oh, is this, well, I guess you're, Nick, do you have a question? Do you have your hand up?
Can you hear me?
Can we hear, because
We,
I think I might be muted. So Nick does have his hand up. Can you hear me, Nick?
Yes, but I
Okay,
guess
and
my
when
mic
you
is.
start talking, can I hear you? That's the question.
Nick, your mic is working
Please
fine.
go
Let
ahead.
me convey to them that have their speakers muted.
Okay.
Commissioner Thompson, are you hearing Nick? Yeah, okay.
Okay, it's because I have turned off
Go
my,
ahead and minimize this software. And just go here and open that up again.
Okay. I think this is my
that?
sound though.
Perfect. Nick,
Okay.
can you
Can you
give us a sound check? Thank
There
you.
we go.
Okay, here we go. All right, Nick,
You-
sorry, go ahead.
You can hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't want to derail the conversation, but just a clarifying question about the clear and objective standards. It seems like the determination of significance step is inherently not a clear and objective thing.
So
So I
let's
just,
flag that. Yeah, let's flag that.
yeah.
Yeah.
As Luba has said, there's nothing less clear and objective than the phrase clear and objective.
Yeah. Okay, but Nicholas, thank you. So on our
Yeah.
to-do list is to wrestle with that. Thank you. Okay.
All right, so I'm going to move on to what I'm going to do now is I'm going to talk about 3 different rules a little bit more in detail and how they serve as examples for different ways of approaching the Goal 5 process. So I'm going to start with our historic rule. And our historic rule leans partially on the National Register of Historic Places maintained by parks, but also in collaboration with Oregon SHPO, because Oregon SHPO has a role in how sites get listed on the National Register. And I also just, again, want to point out that historic resources is one of the Goal 5 categories for which it's optional to have a local inventory. So the historic resources rule provides for voluntary local protection programs. And it says that if a local government's going to take that on in a voluntary manner, there's strong recommendation to use guidance that's been developed for historic preservation, guidance that comes, I think, largely from the National Park Service, but also from SHPO. And but when a local government does choose to add local protections, that will have to be done through a comprehensive plan amendment and adopting code, which also is, goes through the post-acknowledgement plan amendment process with appropriate notice and opportunity for people to comment. And so let's see. So the rule requires it requires protection for structures and sites on the National Register of Historic Places and sets a baseline standard for what that protection is. And in some minds, it doesn't necessarily sound like protection because we don't know what the end point is or what comes out of the review process, but it requires local review of demolition or relocation that includes, at a minimum, a public hearing process that results in approval with conditions, or denial based on consideration of factors described in the rule. So, and then the rule, so that's the baseline protection, and then the rule allows for local governments to add additional protections to National Register sites, but that would also have to go through a public process for everyone to be aware of the intention to apply those additional standards. And so the rule overlaps. So we do have situations where a cultural resource that isn't necessarily a structure, how some people, or at least I in the past, thought more about historic resources. But we can have cultural resources that get listed on the National Register. So that's where we have this overlap, or we're going to have this overlap with whatever rule we write and the historic resources rule.
Any questions or comments on that so far? We're about to change, I think, and go into wetlands.
Yep.
Any comments on this piece? We'll share these slides, of course. So Elliot, if you don't mind attaching these slides with our after meeting survey, I appreciate it. Please.
Will do.
Can I ask John for his input? How does that align with the state's potentially eligible approach to sites? Are we staying in alignment with that element from state archaeology, SHPO?
Yeah, it's really difficult to use potentially eligible, to be frank. So there's for listing on the National Register, there's 4 criteria, and I'll try and keep this brief. I'd be happy to give a broader talk on this process at another time, maybe, but so the National Register defines 5 property types that can be eligible, which are buildings, sites, districts, structures, and objects. And any type of place can fit into one or more of those definitions. So the National Register is very much place-based. And so there's a process for listing, and that involves the keeper of the National Register submitting documentation to them and getting it listed. We have a state advisory historic SACHP, State Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. And so there is a state process where running it through the state process, the folks on that committee can say, yeah, it's eligible, and we agree. And then it can go to the keeper, and the keeper will add a little bit of, weight to that if it goes through that state process. But some of the folks on this call, myself included, we deal in the world of compliance with state and federal laws, and on, for Section 106, it just has to achieve the level where the, like for example, the federal agency and the SHPO agree that it's a place is eligible. So there are differences. And for that process, the agencies are required to consult with groups such as tribes or any other interested groups in a place. Does that kind of get at what you wanted, Brees? Or okay.
I appreciate that. I just to help kind of clarify some of that, what sits in which bucket, if you will. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll add a little bit from the perspective of our rule. And I'd say from our rule, it's clearly has to be listed. The site needs to be listed on the National Register. And
Currently in the historic rule.
yes,
Yes,
that's what
yeah.
the historic rule requires. And one thing that the National Register an actual listing does is it has a step where private property owners can object. And I think that is relevant in that tension, I guess, between protection and private property owners' interests. And so yeah, it does make a difference in how our Goal 5 rules apply, because if a property owner has not objected to a site being listed on the inventory, then it gets protected. And if that property owner then sells it to somebody else, it doesn't change, right? The protections stay, and the new owner should be informed that their property comes with the protections that this rule applies to sites on the National Register. Should we go on to the next one?
There's a lot there, Reese. That's a very pregnant question that we'll be getting back to in much more detail as we look to, okay, what would be state, what would be federal, the benefits and challenges of putting some of those pieces together. So there's definitely a pin in that. Thank you, Reese. Amanda, yeah, let's go ahead into wetlands.
So wetlands has, the wetlands rule has some interesting elements to it. And so I've described it here with it's the inventory of state and local, but the state inventory incorporates the federal, the national wetlands inventory. And then when a local government does a more refined local inventory, that also gets incorporated into the state wetlands inventory. That inventory is kept on the DSL website. It's easily accessed, and our rule, even without having, well, if a local government applies our rule, one of the things that the local government needs to do in their code is really call out a statute that requires notification to DSL for development that occurs in or in proximity to a wetland on the state wetland inventory. So I bring that up because it's an example of how our rule can help with amplifying state statutes and standards that exist in other agencies. So this is something that we've talked about with our cultural areas rule, that our rule could better inform and amplify the existing statutes and rules that apply to archaeological sites. So, but in addition to that component of our Goal 5 wetlands rule, the rule has a very prescribed method. It's actually the prescribed method that exists in DSL rules for how a local wetland inventory is conducted, and then how an assessment is done to separate the higher functioning or significant wetlands from the lower functioning non-significant wetlands. And then the rule has the ability to either apply the standard process to figure out what the pros and cons are of different levels of protection and how that would affect development. Or there's a safe harbor protection described. And so if a local government just applies the safe harbor protections to all their locally significant wetlands, they just have to adopt a code that's consistent with the safe harbor provisions, and they're done. And there's not a lot of room for appealing that action taken by a local government. And I think I did what I didn't intend to do, is I spoke about all that while the pretty picture was up without having my words here. So let's see, did I miss anything?
To read and digest this.
Yeah. So yeah, points to DSL rules or methodology for doing the inventory. So I guess one thing I want to say is that here, because the next example is going to be a little different. Here, the inventory, well, no, I guess it's clear that the inventory actually gets adopted. The local inventory gets adopted by the local government. And if that inventory were to be amended, the local government would do a plan amendment to update that inventory.
And so local government representatives on the call on our RAC, our Rulemaking Advisory Committee, you know, I suspect you're all familiar with local wetland inventories, their relationship to national, and then how they're sort of captured in your local adopted comprehensive plan and associated development regulations. This is one example of how we could structure a Goal 5 cultural area rule that would be sort of locally informed and held, and would be protected, you know, or treated, you know, go through the process at the local level. And then, you know, it's recorded at the state by virtue of the post-acknowledgement plan amendment database at our agency at DLCD. If and when at such time that the Heritage Hub is developed, we could then, you know, the idea is that we could then migrate that data over to Heritage Hub to be held in that, you know, complex database as well, that would be queryable, that would be spatialized, et cetera, perhaps covered. Again, we need to talk about confidentiality, of course, but this wetlands example is it's something that I can understand, and I've very beginner level knowledge of the Goldberg rule. When it comes to historic, I haven't dealt as much there, but this one I can get how this could function for the cultural areas rule a bit. Nicholas, please.
Yes, thank you. So just in comparing these two different kinds of resources, I just want to make sure I understand. I think I get the wetlands example, but for the purposes of the state rule, the historic inventory, it's defined in the rule as being whatever is listed in the National Register. Is that correct?
It's kind of described as like a state level of significant resources, and then the ability to apply, identify locally significant historic resources. For anyone who's a historic resource buff person, I understand that even the terminology in the National Register uses the term like state, regional, local. And we got to forget that right now. And what I'm trying to say is that, but for our Goal 5 rule, the state has said anything on the National Register is important to the state. So that is going to be significant whether or not it exists on a local inventory. And then the local governments have the option of developing their own inventory of sites that are not on the National Register.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, so we'll flip forward again then to move into this little critter.
We're going to move into sage grouse. Okay, so sage grouse is a cool example in that the reason why it's in the Goal 5 rule is because the sage grouse is having a hard time, with whether the species will be able to survive. It was on the brink of being listed as a threatened species, and there's an option through the Federal Endangered Species Act to do kind of preventive measures to avoid a listing. And so so this sage grouse rule was added to Division 23 as a result of a collaborative effort between feds, states, and other parties that all engaged in the effort to achieve habitat protection, so that the listing of the greater sage grouse could be avoided. Listing as an ESA threatened species could be avoided. So we have, in this case, we have a state inventory and state level protection measures. And I'll explain that a little bit more on the next slide. So the inventory is maintained by Department of Fish and Wildlife and shows the core habitat for sage grouse. That inventory is actually adopted as part of this rule, and that's important. It's a distinction because remember, with the local wetland inventories, that gets adopted as a part of the local plan, and if the inventory is amended, the local plan needs to be amended. Here, with the sage grouse rule, the inventory is adopted as part of this rule, and so now we are about to embark on an amendment to this rule because the ODFW core habitat maps have been updated. So in order to be able to use those updated maps, our sage grouse rule needs to be amended. So if we get beyond the inventory here, the local government has a stronger role in working with an applicant to avoid these significant habitat areas. And if the habitat areas, the significant areas are completely avoided, then we're done. And that all happens at the local level now. But if there are going to be impacts that can't be avoided, then the state comes back in, and ODFW comes in and assists local government and uses a model that they've developed for figuring out what mitigation would be needed in order to compensate for lost function or lost actual footprint of habitat. And that gets prescribed as a condition of development.
And this is mostly applying to counties, isn't it? Is it all county?
Yeah, so sage grouse, the sage grouse rule, the conflicting uses it's all rural uses, because that's, where the sage grouse live, and they're all large scale development. So like building a house does not implicate the sage grouse rule. The rule is quite long, and there are different descriptions and thresholds for what type of development would implicate application of the sage grouse rule.
Thank you. And I should just note, I know everyone on the call knows this, that of course the sage grouse were here before Western development, in urbanized areas. So the remnant of their habitat is now rural. We're probably existed where we have urban development now, but the rule now protects the remaining habitat, which is in rural areas. There's significant habitat in rural areas. Long-standing species, obviously, in Oregon. Okay, any questions on sage grouse? This is probably not as precedential for us because of the state level inventory, but it's an interesting concept to know that sort of is an option. Getting to a state level inventory is, I would say, just from the little I know, difficult because inventories are rightly held confidentially by each of the tribal nations. They're held, by a variety of sources, and to put together a state level inventory for cultural areas at this point seems like a decade-long project to me. So we can think about this as a precedent, an important construct, but may or may not be as applicable to us here. But I think it's helpful to think about this and kind of come in, in contrast with the wetlands inventory, which is local, versus a sage grouse habitat, which is comprehensive and global. So just two different really good approaches there. Thank you.
Yeah, since Kirsten, since you mentioned tribal inventories that are held by tribes, it's a big question I think we have right now is whether our state rule could direct a local government to, through this rule, utilize an inventory held by a tribal nation. We don't. There's just a question there. So to me, if we ever were able to get the trust required in order to and the resources, because that's another big question, right? But if we could get the resources and the trust required to have a state inventory, then this is a example of how that could work under a Goal 5 rule.
Sort of patched together, yeah. And we'll hear more from City of Salem too, which is a collaboration with two of the tribal nations in Oregon, in inventory. So I suspect we'll hear more from City of Salem. Please, Jill.
Are you unmuted?
I think that's a really valid point. I mean, it's been a struggle maybe to keep up with inventories because when we go through processes, we're used to more public processes where people can view inventories. We're in cultural resources. We don't want the inventories viewed. So I am interested in learning more about that. I feel like that's always been the kind of the most difficult part about our program that we have currently.
Jill, thank you. And we'll hear from Jill in a bit too. And Jill's example in Coos County has sort of long been a precedential example. So we'll hear about that again in a moment. So Jill, thank you. Do you want to wrap up here on the sampling?
Yeah, this is my last slide. So in this table in the middle here, you see the wetland sage grouse historic resources, which I've talked about. And I've just thrown in 3 other examples showing how, whether we're talking about the inventory or whether we're talking about the protection measures, you can see different combinations of whether the local government applies either a safe harbor approach or a standard approach to the inventory, or same safe harbor approach or standard approach to a protection measure, or whether there's something that is already available at the federal or state level that they might have to adopt or apply directly. So for instance, say scenic views and sites, right? So that's on the list of ones where it's optional for whether a local government needs to inventory them or not. But if they inventory them, they have to go through a standard process to inventory. And then once something is identified, if they're going to identify something as a significant resource in their comprehensive plan, then they would apply the standard process for determining what protection measures would apply. And then for the wild and scenic rivers and wilderness, this is a very sleepy, set of rules in the Division 23. But I want to point it out that yes, there's a federal inventory of these areas, but what the rule says is that the local government looks at these federal inventories and then picks out what is in their county or city, and then they adopt those elements as their inventory, right? So we can't, in our rule, point to the federal inventory. We have to say that the local government can use the federal inventory to automatically populate their own local inventory, but they would have to do that through adding something to their comprehensive plan. Cool.
And that's a really important, it's actually kind of an important point there, Amanda, and you may know this. Why can't we, I'm gonna say it simply, why can't we point to a federal inventory?
I think it's because, and Gordon's on the call, so he can augment this, but we don't have control, right? So we're a state. We need to know what we're saying when we say something, or if we give a direction to somebody, we need to know what it is. And if it lives someplace out in the federal world, we don't really know what we're talking about necessarily. And then we also, through Goal 5, can't point to an inventory that changes. Although when I say that, we do point to the inventory of National Register sites. So maybe I don't know why that works, but generally we can't point to an inventory that changes, and that's why I think that the sage grouse example was interesting, because we have an inventory. When that changes at the state level, we actually have to amend our rule as well.
Right, and same with like the national and the national wetland inventory, and then a local. So it's an interesting theme we might be playing with for a while, is the relationship even of cultural to the National Historic Preservation Act protected properties. But we see this sort of chorus of resources that we recognize locally, and there's a national relationship, and a few examples here. Gordon, did you want to clarify anything there? And I know Curry has something to add too. Should we hear from Curry first, and then Gordon can go? Maybe Curry, go ahead, because you practice in this area regularly.
All right, thank you. I just wanted to note that actually the National Park Service doesn't want us using the National Register of Historic Places, and when our local governments have that in their codes, it is really hard for us to be allowed to have them participate in that federal certified local government program. So local regulation of any kind is not supposed to be connected to the National Register of Historic Places, because the whole decision-making process is a federal process. It has nothing to do with the local decision-making. So using that determination, if it's National Register listed, can replace the requirements of documentation to prove that it's significant in that local designation process. But National Park Service really doesn't love if we use the National Register to tie to any of that. So that's another thing related to the federal side.
Good. We have a few more minutes to on this, so thank you. That's interesting, and Nicholas has a point probably on that. And then Councilor Member Anderson, please. Nick.
Well, it wasn't specifically on that, but I was wondering, and maybe this is a question for John. I have a vague awareness of something called the SHPO archaeological database or something like that. And so why, just maybe he could speak to that. I mean, could that be the foundation of a start of at least subsurface archaeological resources as an inventory, as a start for an inventory? Or is that just,
yeah, we're required to keep an inventory under Section 101 of the National Historic Preservation Act. We get funding from Park Service to implement that act at the state level. And it's so in my area of the office, it's specific to archaeological sites, but there's also a state law that prevents us from disclosing the location of archaeological sites. So our our inventory, we have requirements for who can actually access that. And so I don't know if that would be a potential stumbling block or not for local governments or whatever, but we do keep track of that. And I see there's a couple hands up. I'll just finish by saying our inventory is for about 20% of the state. So in over almost 50 years of keeping those records for the archaeology side of our office, there's only been about 20% of the state that's been inventoried. So our records are, wouldn't cover all places.
Thank you. Perfect. Thanks, John. And Councilmember Anderson, please.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of great conversation. For our county, speaking to is what John was saying. Yeah, it wasn't until a few years ago they didn't know what SHPO meant. But what I wanted to say is I apologize. I have to jump on an emergency call here for just a short bit, so I may be offline for off screen for just a little bit, and then I'll rejoin. Thank you. Sorry.
No, thank you, sir. Please, Breeze.
Thank you. I think inventory, which seems to be kind of at the nexus of the discussion here, and it may be a moment that some of us have too much experience with knowing too much in a very narrow area. In all fairness, that knowing the status of the SHPO's database is minimal. It's consistency because it's been gathered over decades, and standards of recording. But if we can step aside from that detail, right, and pull the lens back a moment, for inventory purposes, are we talking about absolute inventory of known places, or are we in a position to talk about inventory in a form of anticipatory, we need to do more work? And maybe that's a clarification that we could reach here, is for what purpose are we talking inventory? Because if it is for planning, anticipatory, maybe that's a different conversation, and we could talk about how information could be modeled or summarized in an effective manner that leads to a next step for decision, for further exploration, etc. So I offer that up here, that maybe we can get a clearer definition on inventory.
Mm-hmm. I like what you're saying, Brees. And so tell me if I'm hearing this right. So let's say instead of talking about an inventory of archaeological objects or sites, we talk about an inventory of river confluences or known village areas or something like that, that points to the probability element of there being potential impact.
I think we're getting closer. What I would say is, if we are looking at cultural resources, and I would include cemeteries. I would include the built environment. I would include also those places of known pre-contact, Euro-American identities. But maybe we run a model on a quarter unit, right? We basically develop a raster type of model that would be regional, like North Coast is different than South Coast, North, Central, South Valley. And I'm doing the thing that I do. I apologize. I'm jumping to problem solving. So I'm trying to step back, but that's kind of what I'm envisioning, is that gets us a usable something that could be updated as every year. John could answer this. hundreds, if not thousands of sites are recorded. Certainly thousands of acres are studied more thoroughly in any given year than the previous year. So that building on your model of the bird habitat, there could be a moment here of seeing that further develop in an interim. What it does is it potentially creates a moment of obligated conversation, which I think, and I may be wrong, is really what we're after here, is how do we capture a moment of next steps for identification? How do we do right now that we know that, I imagine a world, in this model, it's a red, yellow, green type of red light. We all need to have a conversation because there's something here, a little bit further depth of conversation. So I'm over talking this. I apologize to everyone here.
No, Bruce, it's actually a really good segue from what I understand, and I've been waiting to hear this short overview that Jill's going to give us on Coos County, because I've never heard it from Jill herself. But it seems like that's kind of what the Coos County Policy 18 model is. So let's see, Bruce, as we hear this, see if it's kind of what you're thinking, which is like yellow, So Jill, are you prepared? So folks, before Jill goes real quick, I think I have a minute here well, it is 2:00. So on my agenda, it says we should be turning. So I want to do this quickly, but I want to just recognize the resources we've received from Cassie, Cassandra Rippey, now with ODOT. She's a RAC member and on the call today, but Cassie was generous to kind of share some resources with the Rulemaking Advisory Committee, and I failed to kind of recognize those at the beginning in my fluster. But they were in your transmittal memo. I would commend folks to those as well. We showed the ODOT tribal relations training video to first our tribal liaison program, which is about 22 folks at DLCD, and then also to all staff because we thought it was so important. So ODOT, thank you. And then Cassie provided a link that LCIS and Dr. Bullion produced last year around culturally modified trees that they and ODOT have put together kind of after the wildfires, I believe, of 2020. And then Cassie provided a link to the traditional cultural properties and places for the discussion of cultural areas. So really good resources. Mr. Ed Sullivan also provided a long law review article that he provided to us. It's over 100 pages. So for the strong at heart, but on about page 85 was the description of where cultural areas rule sits in the suite of Goal 5 protected resources. So I know that our Commissioner Thompson was reading through all 100 pages. So Commissioner Thompson, thank you. Not sure if you've gotten to the Goal 5 section yet, but it speeds up. It just says, and the state promises to work in this area, which is what we're doing right now. So that's, sorry, spoiler alert for the Goal 5 part of that law review. But Cassie, thank you for those. Cassie, is there anything you'd like to say about any of those resources you provided before we turn to Jill?
I don't think so. And I'll just start with a caveat of apologies. It seems every time we have a rules advisory committee, I wind up with a head cold. So I apologize for that. No, I think, one of my thoughts here was really just in sharing some of that material was, we shouldn't be trying to reinvent the wheel, right? There's known language. There's known understandings of what we're talking about. People have been working on this for decades, and we should not be trying to create something new when good work has already been done time and time again. And so we should be using those tools that already exist to help us move forward and protect these resources, whether they are known or not unknown, they exist. And just because they're not recorded doesn't mean they're not significant, right? And so I think those are some of the things that we need to think about as we're reading these resources, and as we're talking about what the Goal 5 is, rules are going to be. And so I provided that as some kind of additional context and background for how things are already being talked about.
Thank you. Rely on that sort of lineage of thought. Cassie, thank you. Please stay with us for the duration. I'm sorry, I feel like next time I don't even want to schedule the next meeting, because it means you're gonna have a cold in early May, Cassie. I'm on that now. I'm sorry.
I
You
hope
might also
not.
be allergic to this committee. I'm not sure. Take good care. I hope you feel better soon, but thank you for making it today. Please, Jill, if you'd like. So Jill's materials, folks, I'm not sure. Let me pause again here. Our little flip flop on the page numbers. I'm so sorry. So, let me ask, Elliot, have you been able to replace the packet on the website with the correct page numbering?
Not yet. Is that something you want me to do after the meeting, or that's gonna take some web editing?
Oh, right, because you may have to leave this. Yeah, why don't we just share it? And we'll just know that 9 and 11 are flipped, and we'll send out the corrected version as part of our after meeting package.
I can share the current document from my computer if that would help.
Sure. Yeah, we're gonna start with that'd be great. We're gonna start, thank you. We're gonna start with Jill on Coos County, and that's in your packet on page 11. Page 2 of the current local government examples. Please, Jill.
And actually, I
Yeah.
just want to say to our local government folks that you'll notice that I made a little bit of changes just to make the formatting more consistent throughout, but I didn't change any of your content.
Thank you, ma'am. So Jill, however you like to, if you'd like to go over the 2 pages, or if you just want to speak freely, please go ahead, whichever you'd like.
Okay. I'll just give a little summary of, we have 2 pathways that we administer our program. One is inside of our estuaries and one is outside, though they're very, very similar. We map areas of archaeological concerns, and those are the maps that you can view. They're in very large areas, but then we have the maps with the actual inventory sites, and the actual inventory sites are ones that we don't publicly display. And then we have a process when there's areas that, or when we have conflicts come up, we have a conflict resolution process, basically. It provides for a hearing when there's an issue that comes up, and it gives you a pretty, I wouldn't say it gives you the best pathway, but it does give you a pretty good pathway to follow when there is an issue that arises about protections. So the policy has actually been in place since 1985. We have updated it, but updates have become harder and harder to do. They're a little bit problematic. You have to have funding, to do updates, which always kind of puts a stop on the process. And then you have challenges, of course, from private property owners to listing sites and areas. And when you can't really share the site specific information, people do get a little bit more opposed to actually, well, if you're not going to tell me where the site is, then, how do I know you're really truly doing this? And it's kind of that distrust areas. And education, we work on a lot of education. We try to educate people. Overall, we like that we have 2 fabulous tribes that we can work with, that we can reach out to, Coquille Tribe and Confederated Tribes. We provide those notices. They're usually really quick to get us an answer. We have a 30-day comment period. And then we basically condition our approval on the recommendations that they have. A lot of the recommendations are going to be just, they don't know if there's actually a site in the area, but there's likely to be. So they're just asking for notice when you dig, or if you dig something up, we give them a contact information. So challenges, I would say, again, it's just the education portion of it, some of the cost for updating the inventories.
And you mentioned the Measure 56 notice, Jill. We should probably just mention what that is here.
Right. So the Measure 56 notice, anytime that there's going to be, they call it rezoning, but it's not really rezoning. It's basically anytime there's any impacts to any kind of development and you update an inventory, you're required to provide a notice. And there's certain language you have to use in that notice that says that there may be even tax consequences and stuff, it's a little bit misleading. But it does freak people out. You will get so many phone calls because they want to know why you're taking their property or why you're changing the value of their property, which really doesn't have any, it doesn't really pertain to what you're actually working on.
And Dave, I don't know if you want to weigh in here at all. Dave, I'm not sure you were involved with the ballot measure 56 itself, but is there anything you want to say here about the intent of it? I get fuzzy on my history, but I can't recall if you were involved in that at all. And forgive me if you weren't.
I was, and the intent of Measure 56 is just to provide notification to property owners of an action of a contemplated change in the regulations that are imposed on their property in order to enable the property owner to either, if there's something that an application that they want to submit before the regulations change, to give them time to get the application submitted so that it's subject to the goalpost rule, or alternatively, at least at a minimum, to let them know. And, you know, that when especially on something like this, where we're going to impose Goal 5 overlay requirements on a property and with no ability to actually go to a map and see where the Goal 5 resources are, from the property owner / development side, that requirement is absolutely critical.
Dave, appreciate that. And it's a no surprises intent, as I recall. I too was alive during that time, but I wasn't a chief sponsor. So thank you for bringing that perspective. It does require a certain font size, and Jill's right. It gets folks' attention, whether or not it's sometimes possibly a brunt tool, but it's an effective tool. So yeah.
That's kind of the goal.
Yeah.
It is a very effective tool because it does, you know, when you start talking about taxes, people get really more into it than anything else. I mean, we can have many public hearings, but until you put Measure 56 notice language in it, that's usually when you get the people that want to actually participate, good or bad. I mean,
it's interesting. Our friendly mailers don't get the same attention, even if we
yeah.
Please come to a public meeting, doesn't get the same attention. Your property tax might be affected. So no, thank you both. Jill and Elliot, if you're scrolling, I think you can scroll down a little bit. I'll try and pull it up too so I can help drive. But Jill was just speaking to some of those challenges there and mentioned the ballot measure 56. So I wanted to mention that. And that can be a cost for local governments too, as we're collecting an idea of the resources needed. You know, a global ballot measure 56 notice can be quite expensive for a local government, or certainly a county. If a county were to do one, it can run into the tens of thousands of dollars to mail every property owner. So just right. as we keep those things in mind. Jill, thank you. Please go ahead.
Yeah, and so it's just developing better educational tools. You know, when that Measure 56 notice goes out, how can people actually be involved in that discussion without seeing that specific site information? I think that that's really important to have that thought through. And then state involvement. So I was thinking model ordinances. Sometimes that helps a lot of the smaller jurisdictions. Even model, you know, staff reports, if there's conflicts and stuff, how would you model it? Hearing procedures, kind of those things, additional educational resources. And I'm sure I don't want to put Cassie on the spot, but I'm sure we've all heard this. Well, you know, you hear this statement, the tribe should just buy my land if, you know, if you're going to not let us do anything. I mean, I feel like there should be some better educational materials that we can provide, or a better way. And maybe it's just more community engagement, but having those tools available to your local planning departments is very crucial. Again, that's assistance with open houses, work session, presentations, just to support those efforts.
Good. And you had a suggestion here too, Jill, in what you wrote when there's this question of what would you do differently? This is interesting what you wrote here. Do you want to put voice to that yourself? Because I can never be as eloquent as you.
Which one?
Do you remember what you wrote? So it's this idea. I don't. Elliot, this is on the bottom of the first page of Jill's section, but it's right above costs. You mentioned possibly a policy where applicants are required to sign off on an inadvertent discovery or an anticipated discovery plan.
Yes. Yeah, so in enforcing these policies, not, we're not 100% perfect. Local governments do have problems already with kind of code enforcement aspects. And so I believe if they were to sign off on these plans, it would help in that aspect. And I just think that it would provide another level of comfort on both properties, on both the county with the tribe and the property owners, to make sure that we're protecting those resources.
Good. And Jill, is there anything else you'd like to say? I think we mentioned cost. Where you say implementing kind of like cost of minimal and calculated to a land use authorization, except in case of disagreement where a hearings officer must be hired to review the matter and issue a legal opinion. And that where you're saying that could be around $10,000 for
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
You basically, your local decision makers maybe don't have the knowledge to hold that type of hearing process. It would be nice if there were some people that were trained in this area, that when you do have a hearing, they're versed more in the protections around that are related to Goal 5 and especially cultural inventories. And so we have that conflict resolution that says, it goes before a public hearing, but the only public hearing that we had, I didn't feel very good about it. I don't feel like it was, it was just an awkward process. So I think better language for that would help.
Thanks, Jill.
And I'm curious to hear if other local jurisdictions have the same type of conflict resolution process, or, if they chose a different path, then maybe we can learn from that.
Good, Jill. Thank you. And Cassie, you've worked with Policy 18 for a while. Is there anything you'd like to say about it? Or if you had your druthers, how would you change going forward? Thinking about the Goal 5 cultural area rule.
Yeah, and I'll acknowledge too that I think Courtney Crossman and Gabby Bratt are on the phone here too as current representatives for the tribes. I might just defer to them.
What thing? Yep, come back. Cassie or Gabby, anything you'd like to say about Policy 18? I think I want to put you on the spot, but just an opportunity.
So it's Courtney. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, this is Courtney. I think that it's really helpful to have this policy and have the county there and being like supportive of actually implementing it, because it is the only county within our 5-county service area that we have this kind of program and opportunity to even comment on projects unless it's under a Section 106 federal undertaking. So I would say that I really appreciate that we have this process and that we get 30 days to respond, because even in some cases, like with the Army Corps, we only get 10 to 15 days on permit responses. And we have gone through the conflict resolution process as well with the hearings, which has been, equally as helpful to make sure that things go the way that they need to be going. So that's, really all I'll say to that. But I think it's a great process for the county.
Courtney, thank you. And Courtney, I'll get your official title wrong. Are you serving now as SIPO for the Confederate Tribes of Kusla, Umpqua, and Sayula Indians? And forgive me if I got that wrong.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. Thank you. And Gabby, would you like to say anything at this juncture?
First off, Cassie, go have some tea with honey. I'm so sorry you're so sick. But also just kind of echoing what Courtney said of we don't have many relationships with local agencies like we do with Coos County, where we have the opportunity to comment on the permits and to try and condition them where we see where we sometimes have a concern. And yes, I've only been in the job for a little over a year and a half, so I don't have as much experience with this type of work as like Courtney or Cassie have in like tribal response. But I will say whenever I have questions, they respond back with clarifications. And yeah, I mean, it sounds like educating the general public would really help with like these developers. And whenever I have to go out and monitor a project associated with these permits, sometimes the landowner will be there and be like, oh, why is the tribe here? What is the tribe doing here? It's like, well, let me explain. So I think, again, just having more educational opportunities, however that might look, would be great for whatever that counts. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Thanks a bunch. We have Nick has his hand up, and then we'll hear from Cassie, who hopefully is able to grab some water. And Nick, do you mind if I just defer to Cassie real quick as she's back? Okay, thank you. Cassie, go ahead.
So sorry about that. I had a coughing fit at the exact worst moment. Yeah, so Courtney and Gabby said it well. One of the things that I will acknowledge is that the work is an unfunded burden on the tribes as well. I will acknowledge that, but it's important work that the tribes do. When I was working at Cookwell, and I know that Cookwell and CT Clusie continue to do this work of making sure that the public and the contractors and whoever is doing that work that's receiving these permits from Coos County, the tribes do a really good job of going out and doing that education. But it would be really helpful if that education happened before the tribes had to show up on site, right? Knowing that they have a responsibility to protect or manage resources, knowing why it's important that they're doing that, not just because the tribe says they have to, but because state law says you have to, and because it's the right thing to do, not just because the tribe is showing up telling you have to be respectful of these places that are important to them. So I think that's a key component of the work that we're trying to do here, is get that out and not put that burden on the tribes.
Totally right. These are all Oregon resources, specifically to the tribe. But yes, good. Okay, thank you, Cassie. Amanda, did you have a question for Jill?
Well, just Jill, in your overall, certainly have the estuary protections of the policy 18, but you also have protections that apply across the rural parts of the county. So do you see as much interaction with your code in non-estuarine areas?
Yes. I mean, basically it covers all river areas that have rivers, and we have a lot of rivers that are non-estuary. So yeah, we do have a lot of areas that are marked for potential areas that we are, that we send that notice on. I would agree totally with Cassie if there's like educational materials, we haven't really explored this, but even if we had like a brochure that we could put out at the time of development, we try to explain what the resources are, but I just don't know if, people are a little bit more, not that they're not listening, but, they're just excited about putting in their house or something. And so often they view planning as more as a we're in your way kind of thing, and trying to change that mindset is difficult overall.
So we're in your way, and this is the higher goal.
Right.
There's a reason, because I think we all mean so well, and we sort of sometimes forget the big picture, but yeah, some of that upfront information on background, I could certainly see that. Well, thank you both. Okay, Jill, shall we move past the mic? Anything else you'd like to say about Coos County or words of wisdom before we go? We certainly have the rest of today and also the process. You want to chime back in, but thank you for this overview.
I don't think so. I'm just, anxious to learn how other people also administer their programs to see if we can learn something from it.
Perfect. Dave, please.
I'm just curious, Jill, if you can tell me, I assume some of these potential Goal 5 resource sites are on private land, and I'm not sure. I'm just trying to figure out how you even do Measure 56 notice if you can't tell a property owner whether or not they have a Goal 5 resource on their land, which, you know, obviously is going to be important, not just for the current property owner, but for a potential purchaser. Using the example of someone that wants to build a home, they buy a piece of property, they check the zoning, the zoning allows the home as an outright or a conditional use. They meet all the criteria, they buy the property, and then they go in to submit the application, and they find out there's a potential Goal 5 resource on that property. I can see the reason why people might be a little upset about that, when there's no way that in advance that they can be aware of an issue. And so I'm just curious how you deal with that.
Go ahead, Jill.
Okay, sorry. So basically, when people go to buy property, we hope that they call us. And then we explain what overlays apply to all properties, and we treat this as an overlay. We're not going to tell them that there's a site on the property because, you know, we don't disclose that. And usually if we can just explain that, you know, there's a notice requirement, you're more than welcome to make a research request, and we could tell you additionally if there would be a conflict. Again, we really try to explain how the partnership between the tribes and the county works. And most of the time, if you're calling to check property, that usually just kind of, you know, makes people feel a little more comfortable. People have reached out to the tribes directly and ask questions. And, you know, I think that's a good conversation to happen as well.
Okay.
I know that the tribal, the people that are working for the tribe are like county government. You know, we only have so many people that can work, and we try our hardest to make sure that we're providing that education where we can. I just believe that there's probably better educational tools we can provide.
Kathy, if you don't mind if I just respond to the belt measure 56, I think that only applies, Dave, when they're doing a new inventory adoption. So they probably noticed everyone when they adopted the overlay, but not with every development permit.
And this is a very old code.
Yeah, it's a
So
super old overlay.
Measure
Pre-56, yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, I understand all that. I guess the question is, if I'm doing my due diligence before I end up executing on a purchase and sale agreement and buying a piece of property, is there somebody, either the tribes or the county or somebody, that I can call and say, okay, does this have Goal 5 resources on them and and if it does, can you tell me where they're located so I can make the determination of whether or not I want to continue forward with the purchase of the property?
We do two things and think about it in two parts, Dave. So the first part is just to confirm, and I think you know this because you've been in land use planning and zoning for a while. You disclosed that in the introductions, but the overlay itself is public information. So if people go look at the code, their property, they would see the overlay on that property. So they should know by that flag. And I think that's why they're calling the county, hey, like, you know, what is this? But for the specific resource, I can't respond to that. So maybe Jill or Cassie can, you know, please, Jill, because I haven't administered your code locally, of course.
We can't disclose exactly where it's located. And to be honest with you, the mapping that we have is a point on a map. It's not really going to tell you exactly where it is. Like, I don't have the longitude and latitude of where every site is or a way to do that. What we can tell you is this is how the policy works. This is the conflict resolution portion of it. And then we can explain to you how our partnership with the tribes work. And I do know that some property owners have reached directly out to the tribe to see if they can understand better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in real quick and just clarify that, like you said, there's a difference between the Goal 5 inventory and the actual, like, where the resource is, right? So in Coos County, there's the Goal 5 inventory uses like quarter sections, right? And so the whole quarter section may be referring to one specific resource that's on one person's property and not on the other 500 properties, right? And so we have had people call the tribes and SHPO and say, hey, is there something on my land? Now, we couldn't disclose that to maybe the buyer, but we could disclose that to the seller or to the property owner. The property owner is not a member of the public. That's their property. And they have a right to know what's on their property, because they need to manage that resource. They can't manage something if they don't know is there. Now, we can't contact everybody that's on everybody's property and be like, hey, by the way, did you know you have an archaeological resource on your property? You know, if that doesn't get passed down on deed information, we can't keep up with those property records and those kinds of things. But that's why this process is so important, because if that information isn't on a deed, then this process is a way that we can notify people that say, hey, there is something on your property that needs to be addressed. State law requires you to have a permit before you dig on an archaeological site. You need to make sure that you're doing that appropriate next step and protecting those resources before you go and put in your pole barn, or before you put in a swimming pool, or whatever it is. And so that, I think we've got to separate out those two things. There's the local inventory, and then there's the actual distinct resource. And so there are ways that can go about. You know, talking to a landowner is not talking to members of the public, and we can talk to those landowners about confidentiality and resource protection. So I just want to put that out there.
Perfect. Dave, does that make sense? And then I know we 3 other local government examples. This is a rich one because it's been in place for a while, but Dave, is that we have 3 presenters, 4 total.
Yeah, no, I get that. It just seems, and I understand the policy. It just seems a little strange to impose a Goal 5 overlay on significant areas that don't contain Goal 5 resources, rather than, you know, having the Goal 5 inventory applied to a particular property where there is a documented Goal 5 resource.
Yeah, let's loop back to that in a future, because I have a feeling there was a reason for why a broader area was an overlay, Dave. But let's hear, let's see. I think we lost Reese and Nicholas in that. They're probably trying to help us move along. This is a really important example. So let's loop back at the end to if Jill, Jill, since everyone else took their hand down, do you have a minute to describe why with the largeness of the overlay vis-a-vis the site specificness of certain resources? Probably it's because not all the resources have been mapped, but Jill, please.
So part of the reason that it's a bigger mapped area is of unknown sites, for one, but 2, it was to provide a way for us to have that discussion without actually pinpointing, hey, we think this is where the site is. And so we worked with the tribes to do that mapping for us. And it's just, you know, it's just the same way we provide notice in maybe a special district. I mean, it's a broader area, and maybe that resource in a special district that we're providing a notice to isn't really on a specific property, but it's to that district. And so we kind of treat the tribe in the same way. It's like a district. So we're sending out for comments, and then we get those comments and we incorporate them in. And I'm not sure I gave the best example, to tell you the truth.
Helpful. Cassie's going to jump into, thanks, Jill. Cassie.
Yeah. So just to clarify, so the overlay goes over, you know, whatever the area is, right? So in Coos County, it uses a 1/4 of a mile and says there's something within this 1/4 of a mile. And then that something gets reviewed by the tribe. So the tribes will look at the permit and say, the permit application say, yes, there is a resource on here. Please follow these steps that you need to do. Or no, I know this is within the overlay, but there is no resource here. You're good to go. And so it's then reviewed by someone who has the ability to see that data. Like John mentioned earlier, that the ORA, the archaeological resources data, only certain people can access it. The tribes have that ability, and so they do that review. They say, no, there's no cultural resources here that will be affected. You're good to go. And then the overlay then doesn't apply. It's not just blanket applied to everybody. And the 1/4 section is just saying, hey, this needs a review before it's applied.
Thank you. Super helpful, Cassie. And then of course the rules on inadvertent discovery would still apply, but there's no known inventoried site that archaeological, that someone could access.
Yeah. We actually have some bird sites that are kind of similar to this for ODFW, and that's just because, you know, when they were inventoried, it was before modern GIS, and so we know they're not exactly pinpointed to where they are. We're pretty sure we know where I mean, they're definitely attached to a subject property, but we don't know exactly where it is. So it kind of is the same thing. Like we have to really reach out to ODF and W to find that resource.
Thank you. That's helpful. Breeze, last word on this before we transition to City of Salem. It's coming up.
Yeah, really quick, I'm Jill just brought it up. I was going to point to the murrelet habitat, which is protected information that is not widely shared outside of those privileged and deemed responsible to that information. So we're not in an area that is unprecedented for sensitive information being maintained. When it come back to, for what purposes are we talking about inventory? Because I think, again, we're starting to pull other elements in for these purposes. And I think one of the concerns is the other side of this, because the law, state law does say that it is a responsibility. You cannot actively destroy, alter, etc., an archaeological site without a permit, and you go in and to build your house and destroy the site, you are now in violation of the state law. So that's the other side of the conversation. And I think may help us come back to how we look at inventory, because I think suddenly everybody knowing that they're going to be on the hook for violations of state law may be a bigger number of individuals than what we're actually talking about with trying to find a working path here. So, and with that, I think this is probably a really good segue to City of Salem model.
Yeah, it is. Yes, yes, yes. And so Kimberly, we have you on deck here. Are you available to come on voice? And I think you developed this with a couple of nations, so I hope you'll recognize this party who are also on the call today.
Yeah, hi, I'm not going to use my video because my connectivity is weird. And I do have a PowerPoint I'd like to share if that would be okay.
Yeah, I think you should be able to. I hope so.
Okay, I will give it a try.
Let's see if you have the power, and Elliot, you may need to grant it. While we bring that up, do you guys mind if we take like a 3-minute break? Does anyone else? I just need to run. I don't want to miss a minute of this. Just selfish. I want to go run down the hall and grab a glass of water. So why don't we start again at about 2:40, Kimberly? Thank you. Just one moment, please. We'll be right back.
Can you see my screen while everyone's running away?
It's perfect.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
You can unmute or do you want me to?
Oh, I just unmuted.
Okay. Hey, everybody. We're gonna reconvene. Kimberly, are you still there?
I'm still here. Are you ready for me to get started?
Yes, please take it away. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to give a brief overview of what we do here at the City of Salem and kind of mostly how we got here. So the City of Salem's been a certified local government since 1986. I think Curry kind of talked about that a little bit at the beginning when she was doing introductions. But the key thing I wanted to mention here is that we were able to obtain a CLG grant in 2020 to update our historic preservation plan, which is a component of our comprehensive plan. And that included a specific goal to protect archaeological resources and cultural landscapes. And at the same time, we updated our code and we adopted our CRPs, our cultural resource protection zones, so that those costs were partially covered by that grant for us anyway. And I'm going to kind of walk through how we kind of got here. So we began really with education and working with our local university, Willamette, and the tribes that, in particular, the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of the Silex. And I think Brees and Peter Hatch are here on the call as well today. Brees can speak to what we did to build our program. I think he was there at the very beginning. And so that really, we began by just doing some public outreach, some public archaeology projects. And then at the same time, I think I mentioned at our first session, a little bit of my background. So I was trained as a planner, and then historic preservation, historic architecture, so all above ground things. And then I went back to school and got a degree in archaeology as well. So I was doing this at the same time. So we decided to reach out to our Salem City Council and also the tribal councils. So for the Confederate Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederate Tribes of the Silex. I think that, I don't know if Brees wants to speak to this or not, or Peter, but we found that having that support at the decision maker level was really critical in going the next step with the city's program. I don't know, Brees, you want to speak to that before I move in?
I would just kind of reiterate something that Jill spoke to, and that is confidence. This was a moment to build confidence between the two governments and to help bring forward the intent so that then the next steps of execution and application actually were really grounded in a positive way, and knowing that we were stepping into something a little new and a little different. So that's the short version.
Yeah. Thank you. That that is exactly what it did, and it empowered me as staff to then develop the internal processes that I'll talk about here in a minute, which did involve creating our map, which I know we've had a lot of discussion about inventories and mapping. Ours is very similar to what Jill described in that it's an overlay, and that I'll click to the next level. So it's a protection overlay zone. It's tied to our code and our processes. And I think similar to how Jill described how hers works, ours has 3 different classes. So we have 250 known protected archaeological sites in our zone, but our zone is much larger than that. We have a large buffer zone, and a little bit how we developed that in consultation with the tribes. And I think John also was there at the beginning too. We included a lot of factors. And so how it works in practice is that at the it's incorporated into our pre-application conference. And we also notify at the time of sale, similar to how we notify anyone who's purchasing a historic landmark or locally designated landmark. We have, it's called, it's not, it's expensive to record it as part of the deed, but we've got a little workaround through our local lien office. We put a fake lien on the property and then just notify the property owner that what they're buying has either a historically designated property on it or it's within this zone, and then they can call me to find out what that means. So not every property owner who's going through the pre-app has to go through clearance review. So I have another slide that I'll talk through what that process looks like. But I do want to also mention that one of the other things we've done as part of all this is we've created our monthly tribal roundtable meeting, which is modeled after our Landmarks Commission meetings. So what we do at these meetings is we just discuss active cases, similar to how we do at HLC. So and we have the applicant, property owner, archaeologist, if they're a part of the project, and are able to talk through, I think in a really productive way, how to ensure these resources are protected and that development can happen. So this is what our CRPZ zone map looks like. It's a lookup map. We don't show any boundaries, and it's basically a yes, no. So you can click on the map, you can type in an address. Anyone from the public can access this map. And really it just tells whoever's looking whether it's in the zone or not. And then they basically need to reach out to me if they have questions. It's pretty straightforward. And then this is my flow chart. So one of the things I did want to clarify is that, so our process right now is set up only to apply on publicly owned properties. And how we define public, it's not just city, it's state. So of course, we're the state capital, there's quite a few state agencies. And if there's any public funding being used on a project. And so if those two things are true and it's in our protection zone, then they have to go through our clearance review process. So, and that has to happen before any city permits are issued authorizing ground disturbing activity. So it is quite possible that a property could be in this zone, but it has no known site, and the testing and or any research or the proposed project isn't going to have any kind of impact into any known resource, and there's no worries, then you can get clearance pretty quickly. But we do have 3 classes of review: class 1, class 2, class 3. It's kind of modeled off our land use processes, with class 3 being a development that we know is going to be within the AP of a known archaeological site. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. I'll end with this slide, just a quick rundown of what we have going on now in Salem. So our compliance program really is we wouldn't be able to do it without our CRPZ map. It's really critical to everything that we do. It's integrated into our local land use and permitting. So like I think I mentioned before, it's each planner that gets assigned a new case. It's part of the checklist along with everything else. Like, is it in a wetland? It's a checkbox. Is it in the CRPZ zone? And then property owners or developers contact me very early on. And then it's also integrated into our building permits. So we do have a couple checks and balances. So we have integrated into our building and grading permits that each of the properties that are within the CRPZ zone, they're flagged. So if there is a permit that's going to be issued that's in that zone, it gets roundtabled to me, so I take a look at it first. And then, yeah, we have our monthly tribal roundtable. I also did want to mention we do have 2 citywide inadvertent discovery plans that we have adopted, and those are automatically attached to every permit, every city permit we issue. One is, well, so I won't go into that too much, but yeah, that's another thing that we offer, and regular education at neighborhood associations and that sort of thing about our program. So I'll stop sharing now.
Kimberly, thank you. Sorry. Maybe you should.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, two speakers here. Getting some feedback. Kimberly, can you just, I think you mentioned APA in the course of your sort of rubric. Do you remember what you, did you say that? Do you remember what it means?
I said APE, yeah, area of potential effect. I'm sorry, that's a 106. Is that a 106 lingo?
Okay.
It's the, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that just means the area that the project would potentially impact with property.
Thank you. And then I'm gonna, if I could, Nick, before you jump in there, could I just ask if your roundtables are open to the public, or are those sort of covered or closed meetings when you roundtable with the members of the tribe?
Yeah, those are closed meetings. They're not open to the public. Okay. Invitation only. Yeah.
Okay, is that same as landmarks, or the specific to?
No, landmarks is open to the public, and I think we broadcast on YouTube. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, makes sense. Thank you. Please, Nicholas.
Yeah, so I just so I'm clear, the whole program really only regulates publicly owned properties. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And the reason for that is the direction that I received from my council, is that because this is new, we wanted to try it out.
Gotcha. Thank you.
And city and properties receiving public funding, though. So it could be subsidized housing by a nonprofit developer, for example.
Yes, correct. It's also, yeah, any public funding. So yeah, and it's not just city funding, right? It's any public funding. Yeah.
Thank you. Please.
Sorry, that's what I was going to add, is that it's funding is also a trigger in the process. And I mean, I don't know about Kimberly, but as a participant in those, and this has been standing and operating now for not quite a few, but for a couple of years. It seems effective, and when there are those moments of consternation, there is a space to then come together and have a conversation to hear directly from the tribes about what those concerns might be towards an outcome, not just a hard no. And that's one thing that I would really highlight about this process. Everything from the website to the conversations are all designed to carry a person to the next step, so that there is not a hard wall standing in front of somebody learning about what their responsibilities are. They're carried forward in an effort to say, hey, yes, these are responsibilities. Working collaboratively, we can figure out how to go forward without wholeheartedly erasing identity from place. And it's applicable not just to Native American identity. There have been several other communities identified in the Salem area that have also been part of this same process. So it is designed as a throughput of equal applicability.
Thank you.
Kimberly, tell me if I'm,
No, you articulated yeah, no, you articulated it very, very well. And I think that you hit the nail on the head. I just did also want to mention that I've had to add I've been able to add another option for private property owners, private developers who want to use our process, who are not using public funding, who have seen the benefits on other projects. So I have probably about 5 active cases right now, and that's a new thing. So that I think that's what we wanted to see, is people wanting to take advantage of it, because it helps to ensure that their actual development goes more smoothly, because they're catching a lot of this at the front end.
That's right. I mean, that's the intent, is this, yeah, thank you. Peter, we have just a few minutes. We should probably move along to our next example. Kimberly, thank you so much. This is really so rich, but Peter, did you want to say anything from the perspective of the Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians, if you're able?
I don't know how good my sound will be.
It's good.
But
It's not good. Oh, there it is. It's coming in intermittently.
Just go ahead and pass.
Peter, sorry about that. Yeah, I think it is, you're breaking up. You know, we were only able to hear a little bit. If you're at a place where you can, actually, I think we have chat turned off. I'm sorry, but if you want to type anything to me, I can look at my email and then share it with the group. But thank you, and certainly understand that Confederate Tribes of Siletz Indians has been along throughout as well. Thank you. And then Kimberly, I heard of the sort of I'm just going to call it an MOU, or a sort of that moment, the council to council moment at the front end. Did that include both? Were both nations party to that, both tribes party to that?
Yeah, they were. So the Confederate Tribes of the Grand Ronde MOU was the first in 2020, and then the following year was the Confederate Tribes of the Siletz. And we're in, I don't think Mars is on the call today, but we are in the process of negotiating an MOU with Warm Springs as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
But Mars has been coming to our roundtable anyway, so
Great.
we're acting. So, yeah.
Good. Well, thank you. Is there, would you mind sending us a link or a copy of your inadvertent discovery plan attachment that you send out? I think you had said you had 2, but.
Yeah, I do, but I also want to tell you, well, I'm kind of waiting. Am I allowed to say this? I'm looking at Alyssa and John. I think there's an update. We're going to be updating it. So I can certainly send it, but I think we're going to be updating it based upon some feedback from LCIS. And
okay, why don't we wait then? Let's just wait.
Okay, let's wait.
Well, I'm also wondering, is that something that's included on your website that you provided a link to?
Yeah, it is. It is.
So we can look to it that way. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. And thank you, everyone, Amanda included, for putting this stuff in the packet. They're good. It's good material in the packet. I think we're turning next to Kelly in Wasco County. Kelly, are you available to come on voice?
I am, yes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Deputy Director, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kelly. I am the Planning Director for Wasco County. In Wasco County, we're one of 6 counties, 3 in Oregon, that implement the National Scenic Area around the Columbia River Gorge. And it's a National Scenic Act is a federal act that's implemented through a bi-state compact. And there's a regional body that develops rules called the Columbia River Gorge Commission, and essentially develops a comprehensive plan for the region called the Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area Management Plan. One of the main goals of the National Scenic Area is to protect what we call SNCRs resources, which are scenic, natural, cultural, and recreation. And our cultural resources is a very big component of what we do as implementers in the National Scenic Area. So I think my overview gives a really high level. It's pretty complex how we implement, but essentially almost everything we do in the National Scenic Area is tantamount to a conditional use permit. We send notification to the United States Forest Service. There are 2 archaeologists now that they do a cultural determination. Simultaneously, we also send notification to the designated treaty tribes and also SHPO. USFS looks at their data set for cultural resources and determines if a reconnaissance survey is needed. If it's a small scale, and there are some thresholds for what determines small scale and large scale. Most things are small scale, like most types of development we see. The Forest Service is responsible for conducting the small scale if it was a large scale. So we're talking about pretty big uses or pretty large sites. The landowner would be responsible for basically the archaeology study. And essentially, that's how we implement. Like I said, that's the high level. It can be pretty complicated. We work with 4 main treaty tribes, but we do often also reach out to Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. So that includes Yakima Nation, the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, Confederated Tribes of Umatilla, and I'm going to forget, let me look. Who am I forgetting? Nez Perce is who we typically notice.
Thank you.
So I wanted to talk, one of the main reasons I wanted to be on this rack today is really to share, I think, some of the benefits, but also some of the conflicts that we see in implementing. And I appreciate the insights from those City of Salem and also Coos County, because I think you're going to hear the same thing over and over. I think as doing a lot of Goal 5 work outside of our national scenic area and the county where we do not have as rigorous of a cultural resource program, we certainly identify that our program for cultural resources is really not up to par with what we'd like to see, particularly in an area that is so culturally resource rich as the Columbia River Gorge. You know, we're one of the counties in the state of Oregon that is bordered and includes a portion of the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs Reservation. So we know there's a lot of not only cultural resources, but also first foods and things that are really important to Indigenous populations that were here before us. So we recognize having this protections in the National Scenic Area is really, really beneficial. And I think above and beyond, it really does, I think, a fair and effective job at protecting resources, including human remains. Since the management plan was updated a few years ago, we go through 2 series of tribal notifications. So I think the idea is to make sure that our treaty tribes have clear and consistent messaging from the implementing bodies. And I think generally we find that pretty effective. I did call out one of my concerns is in taking some intergovernmental relations courses in Washington State, that there are some sensitivities around time differences culturally that I think sometimes when we impose deadlines, it may be not always culturally sensitive. So I think that's something that this group may want to consider, and particularly as we talk to representatives from our different tribal tribes, I think it's necessary to highlight that piece, is whether or not the deadlines that we consider acceptable are really appropriate. We've also had I've had some contact with tribal councils that feel often left out of the loop between the professional staff that we deal with in consultation at the tribal level versus tribal councils. So just having an awareness that sometimes within the tribes that we work with, there's a sensitivity and there feels like a gap is something I think to be really cognizant of. The biggest heartburn that we have in the National Scenic Area with these cultural resources is really the significant delays in time. And that's because of the system of basically having the majority of the work in 6 counties done by 2 archaeologists. And those archaeologists, because they work for the Forest Service, often get pulled away to other duty, particularly during fire season. So that creates a pretty phenomenal backlog for cases. And when we are subject, because of the way the bi-state compact is codified in the Oregon revised statutes, we're subject to timelines. We frequently miss those timelines. And so we have to cover ourselves with 150-day waivers. But it's something that we've been actively scrutinizing, talking to DLCD about, and really looking for some kind of resolution and some relief. It's also very difficult to message, as you've heard from Coos County. It's very difficult to message to landowners why what they think is a simple request to build a house can take over a year, sometimes a year and a half. We have seen some friction between the USFS archaeologists and tribal resource specialists and archaeologists in the methodology that's being employed. And so as local implementers, we get caught, and also the landowners, we get caught in a trap because we're not archaeologists. We have to lean back on the rules that are in the management plan. And I think it's really important as we go through this rulemaking process to have an awareness that as much as we can develop objective methodology based on best practices that we can kind of all come to terms with and agree with, that's going to really help out implementation down the road. If we were to go with a system of requiring archaeologist surveys, it just, the costs are astronomical. The skill set is astronomical. So when we have these significant backlogs, we try to push landowners who can afford it to get a private archaeologist to work on their development application. But the reality is there's a very limited skill set and honestly availability of private archaeologists within the state of Oregon to really make that an effective relief valve. So I think having some consciousness about really the lack of large pool of skills to do the analysis in a way that's in keeping with many of the other elements. It's just something really to consider. It's something that, you know, we've had a lot of conversations over the last few years, kind of trying to figure out how to get over that hurdle. You heard Jill mention how it's really incumbent upon us as the implementers to do a lot of education with respect to landowners. And one of the biggest difficulties, I think you've heard some of that conversation, is the planning department that implements doesn't actually have access to where the resources are. We really rely on a third party. And so it makes it challenging to really clearly, transparently communicate. And one of my recommendations is moving forward that if we can have some type of liaison that has access to data and can help bridge that gap with communication would be really, really effective for local jurisdictions. Otherwise, it becomes kind of a Herculean task to try to not throw up our hands and say, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer. I think just generally, trying to think of any other major points that I had. No, that about covers it. I'm happy to answer any questions. I tried to go quickly today on recognition of time, but happy to answer any questions or also follow up with folks offline.
Are you unmuting?
Yes, and Elliot, could you advance the screen down to the next page?
Yeah. Thanks, Kelly. That was perfect on timing. Bless you. I know that there's this just a little snapshot, and you have years and years of experience administering this with the treaty tribes. Mr. Audie Huber is connected to the call. I'm not sure if Audie, if you'd like to come on and say anything or just say hello, but we're talking about Confederate Tribes of Umatilla living with the treaty tribes. I'm not sure if you'd like to weigh in.
Oh no, I'm listening, and I've understand the work that's being done in the Columbia River Gorge regarding Columbia River Gorge National Scenic Area Act. Not much to say. I'm just here today on behalf of Carrie Miller.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thanks for being here. I always feel better when you're in the room. So not just for me, but just, if you could, let us know if we're going off the edge here. So thank you. And Kelly, I appreciate too that you're administering program for Wasco County that's both within and outside the boundary of the National Scenic Area. So that was really interesting. Yield to Jill here, please, Jill.
I just wanted to thank Kelly for that suggestion. I think a liaison is an excellent idea. And I think that probably could help on both sides. Definitely, she said it, she did a really good presentation. It is hard for that education. And it's hard, I think, on both sides, not just your local government, but your tribal government as well. I mean, so I think a liaison would be awesome.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thanks. I feel somewhat opportunistic here, but I can't stop myself. So I'm going to say that it is the season of policy option package review at DLCD. We've just received green light from the governor's office to put out our policy option packages for public review. And we're having 2 webinars on them coming up. So I'll send that information, Elliot, for you to include in the after message as well. So among all the many policy option packages our agency is considering, from data and GIS to housing to climate to farm and forest land protection with 19 goals. There's a number of sort of always needs maintenance like any system. We do have one in for a state local tribal liaison position. Right now we haven't identified that as an archaeologist, but I just wanted, you guys are talking about it, so I couldn't help say something about it. So we'll send you that information about those webinars if you're interested to learn more information. But there's no guarantee just because you have something in a policy option package that it will be included in the governor's budget. So it's a process that all state agencies are going through. Parks and Rec is going through it, everyone's going through it. So it's a part of just the biennial budget build process. I'll leave it there, but Kelly, thank you again. We'll have to turn it over to Nick in the city of Portland. I think Elliot's sharing your pages, unless you want to share, Nick, since we have them in the right order now.
Yeah, I think I don't have a presentation, but I would like to just briefly share my screen and show a map.
Do it. Yeah, that'd be great. Perfect. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Just to orient folks, good afternoon, everyone. This is a map of Portland. So in Portland, our program is geographically bounded into 2 areas where we have similar but not precisely the same regulations. So just to orient you, this is the Willamette River and this is the Columbia River. Here's the Portland International Airport. So our first program dates back to the early and mid 90s along the south shore of the Columbia River. This was an area that was annexed to the city in the 80s and was pretty rural and just primarily farmland. And as soon as, and there were known resources here. I mean, they were known village sites and activity areas in this area. But as soon as it began to urbanize, resources were inadvertently discovered and the city was put in a spot and had to develop a program to protect. And so basically, it was before my time, but the area, there was a big, long, multi-year process where the city worked with tribes and professional archaeologists to extensively field survey the area and do a sensitivity model, and came up with the program that we have in place. And basically, the area that you see in sort of light purple is the archaeological sensitivity area. So any permits for ground disturbing activity that are put in, the property owner has to demonstrate to the city that there are no resources, archaeological resources on the site. And they can either do that by showing that some kind of survey has been done in the past and nothing was found, or they can, more usually what they do is they ask the city to provide a zoning confirmation letter from the Bureau of Planning of the state. The Portland's a little different than maybe some of these other jurisdictions where the long range planning is in one bureau and the implementation is another bureau. So this is a good example of it. The bureau I work for, planning and sustainability, we maintain a confidential GIS layer. So if a property owner comes in, they'll ask us for a zoning confirmation letter. We look at their site information and then check it against our map. And if there's no resource, they're free to go, and that there's no more compliance required from the archaeological end. And then if there is a resource identified, and usually those property owners know already, because this area is, as you can see, it's pretty well built out. So talking about jumping ahead to challenges, one of the challenges that we have is that we so infrequently use these regulations that when something comes in, no one remembers how to do it. But anyway, so if a resource is located on the site or determined to be on the site, the resource is classified by an archaeologist. Like, so if it's a burial, then you basically can't do anything with the site. And then depending on whether it's a village site or an activity area, certain types of really low intensity uses like, surface parking or something can be allowed. But for the most part, anything that would impact the resource, any kind of development activity would require an MOU with SHPO and one or more tribe. And just so you know, this area was extensively auger probed in the 90s. And so we have a good idea of where the resources are. There are a few areas you can see these, I don't know, to me, they're little scarlet areas. These are where property owners at that time declined to have the city pay for archaeological testing. So if someone comes in and wants to develop on those properties, they have to actually do auger probing and report the results. So that has been in effect for a long time. Since I've been working for the city, I think there's really been only one example of development that's proceeded under an MOU. I wasn't involved in that, but my understanding is the program has worked pretty well. And one of the things I wanted to bring up in relationship to the rulemaking, just as an aside, well, I'll talk about the other area. So back in, I guess it would have been 2015, something like that, as part of I think it's goal 15 compliance. Is that the Willamette Greenway goal? For the city was updating the Willamette plan for the south reach of the area, and the city did outreach to a number of the tribes, and I think it was a visit to Warm Springs. They heard from tribal leadership that potential for archaeological resource and cultural resource discovery was a prime concern, and so we decided at the time as a city to try to apply some kind of program to protect here. And our only example was the existing regs that we had in Columbia's South Shore. And so it's more or less the same. It's the same process. The big difference is that we paid an archaeologist to develop a sensitivity model. So the areas in purple here were determined to be higher probability of pre-contact resources, and there are no known resources, pre-contact resources in this area. But what happens here is if a property owner wants to submit a proposal for ground disturbing activity, they either have to show no resource exists by showing either like a previous zoning confirmation letter, or they actually have to hire an archaeologist. So, and that's this has only been in place for maybe 3 or 4 years. And so about 5 or 6 of these have come in. Most of these areas are fairly well developed, but and some of them are pretty well-to-do residential areas. So a lot of these have been for applications for installing a swimming pool. So they'll hire an archaeologist, and they'll come in and do a survey of, there's a pedestrian survey, and at least one subsurface probe of some kind must be done. And they give us the results, and if nothing's found, and they can go on their merry way. And then again, if something were to be found, it would be the same sort of process of classifying it, and then having various development standards apply to development going forward. And so what I wanted to just highlight for this group, one thing I wanted to highlight was just how we had this moment when we were charting these, and this gets back to our early discussion about inventories. We were crafting these rules, and we had this moment where it seemed like we're putting in a program to protect, and we had not yet done an inventory. Like we weren't following the right process. What is the inventory step? And what we've put in is kind of a process to build the inventory over time in this area. I mean, theoretically, over time, we will know more and more about this area and can sort of update our probability model, but we're building the inventory. And I don't know what it's inventory with a small I, but it's kind of an interesting position. So we felt a little bit lost at sea when we crafted this. Yeah, go ahead.
So Nick, because you did this under the Willamette River Greenway goal, there'd be different requirements, right? So the goal is a pretty detailed goal. There's no rule that is associated with it. And I can't remember. I mean, I know that DLCD was engaged in discussions several years ago, but I can't remember what the issues were. But I'm thinking that it's because this is not implemented under Goal 5. There's more, maybe there's more options for how to approach identifying the sensitive sites.
Well, yeah, but let's even pretend that it wasn't, Goal 15 implementation, because we've been asked, we have other watersheds, we have Johnson Creek and stuff, and we've, informally sort of, we have an intention going forward as we do area plannings in areas and we're already doing a plan for some other reason to evaluate whether we want to have a cultural resource protection component of it. And so just that issue of what is an inventory and how to do that inventory and whose inventory is of interest here, because just today we've talked about so many different lists that the Forest Service has a map, and the city of Portland has a map that we know it's not necessarily up to date, right? Because it was collaboratively built with SHPO and an archaeologist and the tribes back in the 90s. But if there was some site was to have been found and identified, how would we necessarily know to update our map?
Right. So it's that interplay of maps and inventories, I think.
Yeah, and I'd like more information about. It's worth discussing the whole issue of the confidentiality piece too. It's like I'm not sure why. The city has a non-disclosure policy adopted by the city council. I'm not sure why the data can't be shared more amongst people that are necessary to implement the program to protect. It seems like sharing that information would be critical. How can you protect it if you don't know what it is and where it is? It's kind of a conundrum for me.
We have a little time. Does anyone want to comment on that? It's very delicate, of course. I think from what I understand, the basics would be to avoid looting, right? So for the creation, but yeah, so John and Breeks, please, John.
Yeah, that's it. Oregon has one of the worst looting problems of any state in the country, and that information gets out, and the person who might touch it first has good intentions, but then over dinner table or whatever, they mention it to somebody and it gets passed around, and folks learn about this stuff. And so it's really hard to keep it secret. Even from us as an archaeologist, if I were going around telling people where all the sites were, that I've worked on or things like that, I would probably lose the ability to continue work as an archaeologist. So we have a real interest, in our profession at trying to protect that information. But I do understand the problem, and I know that money and things like that are an issue, but Kimberly made the effort to become an archaeologist and to get access while she was in her position. I'm not saying everybody has to do that, but it's not a bad idea to have, if you can have one on staff, that'd be great, or have one that you have under contract to just check our records every now and then, things like that. But I don't want to belittle your comment, because I totally get it. But
Yeah.
But yeah, there are just big problems that we're always struggling with far too much. That takes up too much of my job, and it makes it kind of upsetting for me how often we have to deal with stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a really good point that I don't think can be brought home strong enough, which is new information is found routinely. Every year, hundreds of new archaeological sites are being reported to the state. And as we're seeing population, as we're seeing new development, new triggers, more action occurs, more information is known. And as a result, there's a need to do an update to whatever inventory. And I would say maybe the key element here is translation of inventory, so that we get away from the absolute delineation of here resides the burial ground of blank, or the cultural practice place of a tribe. As soon as we do that, we see those loci being decimated and vandalized, appropriated, a whole lot of things that just lead to a breakdown in confidence in all of the partnerships and undermines the intent for which I think we're all here, which is how do we identify so that next steps after identification can occur. Not that it is wholly going to stop anything necessarily. It just creates a moment of conversation and acknowledgement, and maybe it can be saved. Maybe something can be avoided. Maybe minimization can occur. So I think back to what is the purpose of an inventory here? And is it really something that we can talk about getting converted, absolute information getting converted into a data set, a conversational layer that leads people to the next thing. And I know I'm on a high repeat in saying that, but it's in an effort because I think we can all find a way to straight arm and say no. I don't think that's the intent of Goal 5. So if we're sticking with the intent here, how might we get going? Or, how do we go forward here with the acknowledgement of there are other recommendations that need to accompany going forward with this? And that may be hearing about the state of Aura, the state the state's charged with the inventory. It exists. And how do we make sure that that is robust enough that it serves this other responsibility? So I'm over talking it and I apologize.
Hey, thanks, Amanda. If I may, speaking of policy option packages, since I gave a shout out for ours, I would be remiss if I didn't say that John and SHPO and Parks and Recreation will probably be sharing theirs with stakeholders too. So John, any information you want to share as the time comes right on Heritage Hub with this group, we're certainly happy to send that along.
Yeah, other than what I said at the beginning, I don't really have much of an update right now, but
That's fine. That's fine. That's great. Okay, so Nicholas, any last words? Thank you. That was really interesting. And really, we could go on for an hour about this, but I think people are probably have other obligations at 4. But thank you for sharing this. It's a place I call home and have grown up, and increasingly I'm nervous about everywhere I walk, every places we are, knowing that all Oregon was indigenous for centuries and millennia. So thank you for sharing just that.
If I could just one final thought, a question that doesn't need to be answered in this moment's space, but one thing I was, our provisions also have allow for, I forget the terminology, but non-subsurface and cultural use spaces that are still living places that are important to people. And we don't currently regulate any of those. I'm sure they exist in the city of Portland, but I'm just wondering, we have to put our thinking caps about their archaeological resources versus more like, I don't know how zoning code deals with a ceremonial space or something like it. It kind of scrambles my brain thinking about it. So I'm anxious to see how the group thinks about that and how the rules speak to that.
Thank you. Please stay tuned. I mean, that's, we will be wrestling with landscape areas, so
Yeah.
as opposed to that aren't archaeological sites. So that's what we were back there. So soothe your brain by letting it know that we'll get back there and they'll have a chance to roll around with that too. Thank you. I think Amanda has our last overview from Lane County. Please tell us about who wasn't able to make it today and what you're delivering.
Yeah, Latifa was not able to make it today. She's traveling for a conference, and but I had a great opportunity to talk with her and 2 planners at Lane County who walked me through the summary that they provided. So I can speak out from what I think I understand, and we'll probably save some time because I might not be able to answer any questions that come up. So Lane County is similar to Coos County in that a portion of the county is in the coastal zone. So they have codes that grow out of Goal 5 and Goal 16, the estuarine management goal. So this the language they have was adopted in 1984. And so being a county, what we're talking about are standards code that apply outside of urban growth boundaries generally. There are about 100 cultural sites, archaeological sites on Lane County's inventory. And they are noted by section, which I think is kind of interesting. Coos County does quarter section, Lane County does section. So this being an old comprehensive plan, it has this glitch, I guess. So back in the 80s, implementing Goal 5, kind of even before there were rules for it, if there wasn't enough information to go through the whole process, so if you didn't have enough information to like exactly know where the sites are, so thus you don't exactly know how the conflicts are going to play out, then the process was stopped prior to the analysis, the impact analysis called the ESEE, or analysis of the economic, social, environmental, and energy consequences of a decision. So Lane County's process was truncated before the ESE analysis was done. And so due to lack of information about the resources and their precise location. So they adopted in their comp plan interim protection, and in my notes here, I have that in quotes because there was also a part, if when you look in there, I can't remember, I think it's a code policy, and it talks about, going back and revising this, I think in like a 2 or 4 year period, but that was not done. So the interim protections from the 80s seem to still be being applied today. And the county primarily sees, well, all the sites, because they didn't go through the further process, they assume sites are significant. They also apply confidentiality or secrecy, thinking that's like a high or one way, as we've been talking about, to protect sites. But when a development permit comes in, or not, there's 2 different steps. So first, if a building permit comes in and the planner looks and they see that it's in a flagged location, so it'd be a section that one of these 100 or so sites are known. And also I want to say, but I believe, and I think when I asked this to the planners, they confirmed that these 100 sites are what was on probably SHPO's inventory is what informed that back in the 1980s. So why they have them in their inventory. So so for a building permit, this is happening kind of quickly. There's not a lot of back and forth between the planners and the applicant. So in that scenario, the applicant is required themselves to obtain a letter from SHPO stating that their proposal will not pose conflict with the site. If it's a land use authorization where there is more back and forth between the local planners and the applicant, the county staff takes on the responsibility for requesting that information from SHPO or confirmation from SHPO that the proposed development doesn't pose a risk to the known site. The county has also, just on its own, through its own kind of development of policies, now also notifies tribes of proposed applications for land use authorization when one of these sites is flagged in their inventory. And by doing that, I mean, someone doesn't actually have to receive notice in order to participate in the process, but it sure is helpful, right, to know that the public process is going on. So by sending those notices to tribes, and that provides a better opportunity for tribal representatives to submit information into the record of the review, and thus giving some potential to have standing if there was need for an appeal of the county. I guess I think I'm going to save just the interaction with tribes to something I'm going to say at the end. So I'm going to keep going. Lane County's practice is to incorporate any recommendations they get from SHPO or a tribe as informational conditions in the land use decision. So it's not really a condition, right? It's a soft condition. So here's information, heads up, I guess, maybe like what we're talking about, stay clear of violating state laws regarding disturbance of archaeological sites. So these interim protections described in there, yeah, I'm not sure if it translates. I think some of it translates into code, but let's just say it's in their plan. Mentions or requires that the county coordinate with SHPO and local museums and tribes in the event of concerns or conflicts. However, to date, no potential conflicts, at least known to the current staff, with inventoried resources have been identified to an extent that would warrant program amendment or restrictions on development. So I want to mention here, the overlap with historic resources. The county in their write-up explained that at least one site listed on one of the archaeological sites is also listed on the National Register. And then covering costs. So in Lane County, the cost of this is covered by application fees, but we haven't really, what they said is they really haven't seen a situation where a requirement for an archaeological survey was required. So really no information about how that kind of cost would be covered. Their thoughts on what kind of support might be helpful from the state is supporting a collaborative state tribe government, a state and tribal government cultural resource inventory with baseline protections, and to help with facilitating collaboration and developing relationships between local government, state government, and tribal government. And the last point I want to make is that when I've mentioned about the county having a policy to connect with, to notify tribes when a proposed permit or application for a land use authorization is in a flagged area, that's just one of kind of an evolving set of policies that they're pursuing to improve and strengthen relationships with tribes that have a connection to their county. And I was able to find on their website like a policy statement. It wasn't signed on what I found, so I don't know if it was signed or when it was signed, but just talking to the staff, it was clear that the county is interested in, on their own, pursuing better relationships with tribes that would improve their ability to recognize archaeological sites and cultural areas in their planning program.
Great. Great. And I'm sorry that Lane County's not here as well, but Amanda, thank you for doing that ahead research and summarizing. Any comments or questions on Lane County's ordinance? I'm not sure if any of the tribes have kind of worked with that. For the Lane County resources at all. Anything comes to mind? Hate to talk about them when they're not here, but we could also pick it up on the next meeting. Yeah. Okay, well, you guys, I'm going to start to turn. Hey, Commissioner, Councilmember Anderson, anything, please?
Oh, yeah, just real quick. I know that's something that we're trying to strive to do, is work better with our local government and develop that relationship. I know it's a work in progress on our end. Appreciate that though. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilmember, thank you. And Councilmember Anderson's doing dual service here at the DLCD. I just want to say thank you for also serving on the Goal 5 Solar on Farmland Rulemaking Advisory Committee in Eastern Oregon. Also had a 3 or 4 hour meeting this week. So thank you so very much for being with us in both these kind of related efforts. Very grateful, very grateful. Out there in Christmas Valley last week. Not an easy weather travel week either. So turning towards wrapping up here. It is Friday. We've heard some strong themes here. I just really can't thank enough the local government presenters and Amanda for working to put together this background information. There is quite a bit of information summary, links to codes, links to other information in the packet material. Amanda had an overview on her baseline Goal 5 resources, so please share that with members of your teams if folks are looking to kind of follow along. And today we've heard certainly just a short list. I'm gonna list a short list of kind of challenges and things to get back to. And I'd be curious if RAC members had anything to add to that. I know this won't be complete, but we've heard themes of the primacy and the importance of education and relationships, different levels of relationships with tribal nations and formal and informal. It's fascinating to hear. We heard obviously, inventories and confidentiality is supremely important. Is an inventory built over time? Different ways of doing inventories, noticing the public and then, property owners, and also having an underlying inventory that, to which folks in the field, archaeologists have access to. And then the scarcity of archaeologists as well. So if anyone has children that are preparing to go to college, I would encourage them to please consider pursuing this line of work. Because I've heard of a cultural resource cluster, we hear about people recruiting against each other, recruiting away from each other as well. But it's definitely we heard, Kelly was quite clear about the kind of the pool of consulting archaeologists and how challenging that can be. We've heard about, I'd be remiss if I didn't say cost and time. Certainly factors to be considered in a practical program that can improve the state of the state. In Oregon, I feel like I should mention, the development certainty back in your original packet and some information we provide on our website. It's just an overview of this project, and in it, we recognize some of the constraints of the Oregon Development Program. So the Oregon Development Program, for better and worse, is the nation's only comprehensive planning program. So that means that most folks in this room know this, but every city and county in the state have an adopted comprehensive plan. We also know that, not all the tribes were in recognized status during the development of those comprehensive plans. So some of this is catching up with ourselves. Some of the other things that we know and recognize in that one pager is that we have this development certainty kind of program in Oregon. For better or for worse, it differs a bit from SEPA and CEQA that we'll find in other states, but one of it is our development timelines, 120 days and 150 days for decision making at the local level, which, when we hear the timelines of 30 days for comment, and I think it was Kelly that rightly, or perhaps it was Kimberly or Kelly, forgive me, I can't remember, but someone, rightly mentioned that that's a cultural construct, and yet it is law in the state of Oregon. So just want to make sure that we remember that we do have these sideboards. We have a housing crisis. We have a number of things to balance. Amanda just pinged me that perhaps Gordon would have some things to say here. And I know Commissioner Thompson's going to, because I'm going to turn towards Commissioner to also give us closing comments. But Commissioner, do you mind if I just call on Gordon for a moment? We didn't include things in this packet about our different layers of land use in the state yet, legislative versus quasi-judicial versus ministerial. I thought we'd put those out when we put out a draft rule. But Gordon, is there anything, if you're still with us, anything you want to add here at this point that you heard today?
Well, thank you, Kirsten. The one thing I did that was going to make a comment, but then you were going on to other things. Back to the Measure 56 item, that is a state law. And I think, clearly it did apply to Coos County because Coos County, as Ms. Anderson said, did their work, or excuse me, Jill Rolfe, as Ms. Rolfe said, did their work before that law went into effect. But I would think if any county or other jurisdiction that didn't do that now were to emulate Coos County and do a similar thing or proposal, then there would be some issues with notification under Measure 56, and that gets into all the questions about that John just talked about the issues with discovery and knowledge about where these resources are. So I just wanted to make that as a point as well. It's a very a complicated area to work on. I would say one other thing, I was on the trip to Christmas Valley for our solar renewable energy rulemaking and reducing conflicts. And so was Councillor Anderson from the Klamath Tribe, who's here today as well, who gave an excellent summary of the work that was done on an individualized project basis with the solar developers on large project in those areas to, I think, the satisfaction of both parties. And to me, it sounded very much like a process that would be done under the National Environmental Protection Act and California's Environmental Quality Act and Washington's SEPA as an individualized project review, as opposed to a county inventory that is the way we deal with Goal 5 resources in Oregon. So I thought that was an interesting exercise that was done there. The area around Christmas Valley is one of the most longest inhabited parts of North America. It turns out a very
a special place in terms of cultural and archaeological resources, as Councilor Anderson can attest to. And so I think there's some potential going forward there, looking at that avenue as how the solar developers and the county and the Klamath Nation resolved those issues on those particular properties.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One of our next steps is to schedule our next meeting, and that's Councilor Anderson. I'm not sure if you want to say anything about that. I see you're on camera. No, you're out from enough of 8 hours of meetings with DLCD this week might be enough, but if there's anything else you wanted to say, please.
No, thank you, Gordon. No, I'll just leave it at that. It was had an eventful day already.
Yeah, no kidding. I bet, sir. Thank you. And then Gordon Howard is our Community Services Division Manager at DLCD, and we're grateful for Gordon's leadership and support. He has practiced at the local level. He's a land use attorney and our Community Services Division Manager, my former boss. So I'm glad that I always feel better when Gordon's in the room as well. We do have a poll out. I think, Elliot, can you remind me if we've already sent this to committee members for our next 2 meeting dates in May? Or if we'll be sending...
that's going out post this meeting.
It's going out this meeting. And can you remind me of those 2 dates? So one of them is the 21st. Is that right?
I'll have to pull it up here.
Yeah.
Give me a moment.
21st, I think, is it? Let's see. Wait. I know we have them held. This is coming up. Sorry, just quick pause here.
I believe May 9th, May 10th, and those are one option also on May 13th.
May 13th, great. Right. Oh, actually, yeah, yep, we do in the morning. Okay, yeah, so 9th, 10th, and 13th in May. So that's a Thursday, a Friday, and a Monday. Hopefully, one of those will work for the majority of us. So Elliot, do you plan to send 2 different survey links then? One, the kind of after meeting questions, and the one a doodle poll, or is that, we can send it all?
I'm sorry, I actually forgot. I was getting the 2 mixed up. The doodle poll has been sent twice, once at the beginning of the packet, and then once when we sent Mr. Sullivan's materials. It's the Survey Monkey questions that'll be sent prior to this, or after this meeting. So the doodle polls have been sent already.
Great. Do we have a front runner? Do you want to check that while Commissioner Thompson gives us her last words, and then we'll let folks know what's running ahead?
Sure.
Please,
Give me a moment.
I spent a lot of my career working with criminals, and it breaks my heart to hear that we have to break trust with each other because we can't disclose information. So I wonder about effective deterrence. And maybe I've just spent too much time with law enforcement and prosecutors, but I have to tell you, there's no way that these kinds of crimes should go unpunished. My supposition is that it's difficult and time-consuming and expensive and requires expertise. But there are some people who will behave badly unless they get significant negative consequences. And I'd like to stop them from despoiling the landscape. I mean, I love that phrase to don't erase identity from place. Thank you, Bryce, for that. So if we're preserving that, if we're looking at how to have trustworthy and to the maximum extent possible, transparent interactions that create a shared identity for all of us, I want to see us not only promote the good and have all of the related processes and partners for that. I want to see us protect from I would call them evildoers. That's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Commissioner, thank you. Grateful for you being here with us.
Here's the follow-up. It looks like Thursday, May 9th, 2 to 5 p.m. is so far the clear winner with, well, not clear winner, 13 votes out of the others, all remaining to be 12. So 1 vote ahead.
So it is actually, it's pretty neck and neck. So if you have a strong opinion, please answer the doodle poll on 9th, 10th, or 13th of May. We do hope to put out our straw proposal, the full draft rule, and that would include definitions. We've had a conversation with a couple folks about definition. Ed provided some comments in writing too. Mr. Sullivan wasn't able to be here today, he's traveling. But that would be embedded in the new rule. We honestly wanted to hold definitions in the context of the full rule, because otherwise we could spend a year just talking about definitions. So the next time you'll see definitions will be in the context of a full draft rule. Is our intention, and we intend to, by hook or by crook, gonna try and get that out by our 2 weeks before our meeting date in May, which is pretty quick work. So I hope everyone has a really wonderful rest of March, and perhaps some spring break in there for some. But again, just grateful for the time and wisdom on this committee, and wish you all safe travels in the coming weeks. Thank you. Thanks, Alyssa. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.